The backup server wasn't supposed to reconnect. I had shut that system down 11 months earlier after migrating everything to cloud storage. Old photos, work archives, unused project folders, digital clutter. That was all it was supposed to be. But at 1:13 in the morning, while rain hit the apartment windows hard enough to sound like static, the drive suddenly appeared on my desktop again. No notification, no startup sound, no warning. Just a quiet folder restoring itself in the corner of the screen, like something waking up on its own. At first, I almost ignored it. Then I noticed the sync date, 3 days earlier, which made no sense because the server had been offline for almost a year. I remember staring at the timestamp longer than I should have, not because I understood what it meant, because part of me already did. The folder that reopened automatically was labeled Archived Chats, and buried inside it was her name. I didn't open it immediately. That's the part people usually misunderstand. When something has the power to permanently change your understanding of another person, your brain delays the moment on purpose, like instinctively refusing to touch a hot surface. But eventually, curiosity becomes heavier than fear, so I clicked it. And within maybe 10 seconds, the entire relationship started restructuring itself in my head. Not because of what I found, because of the dates. The conversations she swore never happened had been backed up automatically months before she deleted them. Complete, unedited, time-stamped down to the second. And suddenly I understood something that felt worse than betrayal. She hadn't only lied. She had tried to make me distrust my own memory. And the worst part was, for a while, it worked. Because at that point, I still thought this story was about cheating. It wasn't. It was about reality itself being rewritten. Before everything collapsed, our relationship looked stable from the outside. Not performative, not chaotic, just settled. We had routines: Sunday grocery trips, late-night food deliveries, shared passwords, vacation plans saved into folders we never renamed. The kind of relationship people quietly assume is heading toward marriage. And honestly, I thought it was too. Claire had this way of making every room feel emotionally organized. She remembered birthdays, checked on people, sent thoughtful messages, made friends easily. Everyone trusted her quickly. That mattered later, because people rarely believe manipulation when it comes wrapped in warmth. The strange thing is, the warning signs were never dramatic. They were microscopic. A delayed reply that didn't match her online activity. Conversations that somehow felt rehearsed. Moments where she smiled too quickly after being questioned. Tiny inconsistencies. Nothing big enough to confront. Just enough to quietly disturb you at 2 in the morning. Sometimes she'd place her phone face down, even when nobody was near her. Sometimes she'd leave the room to answer calls that lasted less than 30 seconds. And every single time I noticed something strange, she already had an explanation ready before I even asked. That part stayed with me later. Prepared people are dangerous, especially emotionally prepared people. But I trusted her, or maybe more accurately, I trusted the version of her I had emotionally invested in. There's a difference. People think betrayal destroys trust instantly. It doesn't. Usually it happens slowly, through repeated moments where your instincts notice something your emotions refuse to accept. And eventually, you stop investigating the inconsistencies. Not because they disappear, because exhaustion replaces certainty. That's the stage where manipulation becomes most effective. When the other person no longer knows whether their discomfort is intuition or insecurity. At the time, I didn't realize I was already losing ground. The first real fracture happened on a Thursday night, not during an argument, during silence. She had fallen asleep on the couch while a movie played quietly in the background. Her phone lit up once beside her, just once. I wasn't trying to snoop. Actually, I almost looked away. Then I saw the notification preview disappear before I could fully read it, but one phrase stayed visible long enough. Miss you. That was it. 2 words, no name, no context. Just enough information to create a problem your brain can't stop reopening. The next morning, I asked her about it casually while making coffee, and something shifted immediately. Not panic, precision. She laughed first, then tilted her head slightly and said, You know what your problem is? Not what message, not who. Instead, you overthink everything. That distinction mattered, because innocent people usually address the accusation. Manipulative people address your perception instead. I remember apologizing 10 minutes later. Apologizing for noticing something. And that was the moment the balance of the relationship changed, without either of us saying it out loud. After that, she became more careful. Replies became cleaner. Notifications disappeared faster. Entire conversations somehow never existed anymore. Once I mentioned a restaurant she claimed we had discussed together weeks earlier. She looked directly at me and said, "That conversation never happened." Calmly, confidently, like reality itself had become negotiable. The terrifying part about gaslighting isn't the lying, it's repetition. Eventually, your own memories start sounding less convincing than their certainty. And slowly, you begin editing yourself before they even have to. That's how people lose trust in their own instincts. Not through one massive deception, through hundreds of tiny corrections. At some point, I stopped confronting her entirely. Not because I believed her, because I no longer trusted myself enough to continue. And somehow, that made her even calmer. 3 weeks later, we had dinner with mutual friends. Normal evening, normal conversation, at least on the surface. Then one of her friends mentioned a rooftop bar downtown. Claire froze for maybe half a second. Tiny pause. Most people wouldn't notice it, but once you start recognizing emotional inconsistencies, you can't unsee them, because reactions happen before language does. Then her friend said, "Oh wait, wasn't that the place you went last winter?" Silence. Not dramatic silence, dangerous silence. The kind where everyone subconsciously realizes something is wrong, but nobody understands what yet. Claire answered too quickly. "No, different place." Conversation moved on, but my brain didn't, because I remembered that exact weekend. She had told me she was visiting her sister, and suddenly the timeline split open in my head. That night after she fell asleep, I sat alone in the apartment, replaying details I had ignored for months. Trips, late replies, mood shifts, sudden disappearances, patterns. That word became impossible to escape after that. Patterns. The human brain can survive lies surprisingly well. What it struggles with is contradiction. And once contradictions begin connecting, reality restructures fast. I almost confronted her again. Almost. But something stopped me. Instinct, maybe. Or exhaustion. Instead, I opened my old desktop system looking for archived photos from that winter trip. That's when the backup server reconnected. Quietly. Automatically. Like the past had been waiting for the right moment to return. At first, I thought the sync files were corrupted. Then I opened the archive and saw everything. Deleted conversations, screenshots, voice notes, cloud-synced message fragments she must have forgotten existed. The timestamps destroyed her entire version of reality within minutes. Not because of one conversation, because of consistency, repeated language, repeated meetings, repeated lies. And buried deep in the logs was the part that actually hurt. Not the emotional affair, not the cheating, the preparation. Conversations about how to handle me, how to redirect suspicion, how to make me back off, how to turn concern into insecurity. One message said, "He notices patterns too quickly." Another said, "If he asks again, I'll just say he's anxious lately." I remember leaning back in my chair after reading that, completely still, because suddenly every argument from the last 6 months sounded different. Every apology, every reassurance, every moment I doubted myself, rewritten. People think betrayal breaks your heart. Sometimes it breaks your perception first, and honestly, that's worse. I didn't confront her immediately. That surprises people. But once someone spends months manipulating your reality, emotional reactions start feeling expensive. So instead, I watched quietly for almost a week. Not obsessively, calmly. And the calmer I became, the more obvious everything looked. That's the strange thing about emotional manipulation. Once you stop needing the other person to confirm your reality, their entire system starts collapsing automatically. I noticed how carefully she managed conversations. how quickly she redirected uncomfortable topics, how often she used emotion to avoid specifics. She never answered directly when truth became dangerous. She reframed. That was her real skill. Not lying, reframing. One night she asked, "Why have you been so quiet lately?" I almost laughed. Because manipulative people become uncomfortable the moment they can no longer read your emotional state. Silence removes their map. I looked at her for a few seconds and said, "I think I've just been paying attention." That line changed the atmosphere instantly. Tiny shift, but irreversible. After that, she started becoming unusually affectionate, more attentive, more emotionally available, more careful, which only confirmed everything further. Because timing exposes people. Sudden emotional intensity usually appears when control begins slipping, and for the first time in months, I stopped explaining myself. That was the real turning point, not the evidence, detachment. People think power comes from exposing lies dramatically. Most of the time, real power begins the moment you no longer need the liar to admit anything. The backup server had already done that for me. Truth didn't require permission anymore. I asked her to meet me Saturday evening. Small restaurant near the river. Quiet place. Dim lighting. Almost empty. She smiled when she arrived. But the second she sat down, I saw it. Instinct. Some part of her already knew the atmosphere felt different. There's a specific silence that happens when someone realizes they're no longer controlling the narrative. I didn't argue. Didn't accuse. Didn't perform anger. I just opened my laptop slowly and turned the screen toward her. That was enough. Her expression changed immediately. Not guilt. Calculation. She started speaking before fully reading anything. "I can explain." That sentence told me everything. Because innocent people ask what they're looking at. Guilty people prepare explanations first. I remember interrupting her calmly. Not loudly, just enough. "You didn't just lie. You tried to make me distrust myself." That was the first moment she looked genuinely unsettled. Not because she got caught, because the manipulation itself had finally been seen clearly. And once manipulation becomes visible, it loses power fast. She cried after that. Not dramatically, controlled crying. Careful pauses, careful wording. Even then, part of her was still managing perception. But something inside me had already disconnected. That's the strange part about clarity. Once it arrives completely, emotion leaves with it. She asked if we could fix things, and honestly, months earlier, that question would have destroyed me. Now it just sounded tired. I closed the laptop, looked at her quietly for a second, then said, "I think the worst thing you took from me wasn't trust." She looked up slowly. It was certainty in my own mind. And after that, there wasn't really anything left to discuss. So I stood up, paid the bill, and walked out into the rain without looking back. No dramatic ending, no revenge speech, just silence. The kind that finally belongs to you again. Mutual friends figured things out eventually, not because I exposed her publicly, because false narratives become difficult to maintain over time. Contradictions accumulate, patterns repeat. Truth becomes visible slowly, then all at once. A few people reached out later, mostly awkward apologies. Apparently, she had spent months describing me as emotionally paranoid, too sensitive, too suspicious, too insecure. And honestly, that part didn't even hurt anymore, because once you fully understand what happened, you stop needing strangers to validate it. That's the final stage most people never talk about. Peace. Not victory. Peace. A month later, I was cleaning old folders from my desktop when I found the archive again. Thousands of messages, photos, voice notes. An entire relationship compressed into digital memory. I stared at the delete option for a long time, then did something strange instead. I backed up my own photos separately, the real ones. Trips, late-night dinners, random moments that had actually been genuine before everything fractured. Because not every memory becomes fake just because the ending was. That realization mattered. Then finally, I deleted the rest. Not angrily, carefully, like closing a door quietly after realizing nobody honest was left inside. And for the first time in months, the apartment felt still again. Not empty, peaceful. There's a difference. Maybe some of you know what this feels like. Not necessarily betrayal, not necessarily cheating, but the slow, exhausting experience of realizing someone has been reshaping reality around you, one small correction at a time, making you question your memory, your instincts, your emotional certainty. And maybe the hardest part wasn't losing the person. Maybe it was realizing how long you spent apologizing for things that were never wrong in the first place. That kind of confusion stays with people longer than they admit. But here's something I've learned. The moment you stop needing someone to confirm what you already know, their control over you begins disappearing, quietly. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not expose someone publicly, but simply refuse to keep doubting yourself for their comfort anymore. I'm curious what you think. If someone spent months making you question your own reality, would you confront them? Or would you walk away the moment you finally saw the truth clearly? Tell me in the comments. I read all of them.